So, I'm pretty sure that none of us needs a reminder of just how monumental the launch of AMD's Zen 3 based CPUs were. AMD has been making major waves in the market ever since Ryzen first swaggered onto the block back in 2017, but it was only really until the Zen 3 chips arrived that things reached peak interestingness. With the launch of Zen 3, AMD wasn't just the best bang for the buck chipmaker anymore. They actually legitimately managed to dethrone Intel where it mattered most: gaming. But out of all of the chips that reviewers wrote love songs to back then, the Ryzen 7 5800X just wasn't one of them. But that was then, and this is about 9 months later. And if biology taught me anything, it's that 9 months can change a lot of things. So, let's see whether the 5800X really is still the black sheep of the Zen 3 family, or whether you can finally buy it without reviewers making you feel bad. But first, if you want to pick up the 5800X or any of the parts I'll be mentioning in this video, go ahead and do it via my Amazon affiliate links in the description down below, or if you're in South Africa, grab it all at Wootware, also linked down below. Now, AMD's Zen 3 architecture brings with it a ton of improvements, and for those of you who want to get clued up on all of the spicy details, I'll drop a link to those down below. But because we've watched these chips in action for a while now, I won't be digging into all of those in this review. What I will do is mention that Zen 3 is efficient AF thanks in large part to the Teensy 7nm process. It comes packed with that sexy PCIe 4.0 and a very healthy generational IPC or instructions per clock boost. That last part being the most important there, especially for us gamers. As for the chip we're working with here, the Ryzen 7 5800X comes packed with all those goodies packed into 8 cores, 16 threads, with a base clock of 3.8 GHz and a very tasty max boost clock of 4.7 GHz. It also ships with 32 megs of L3 cache, has a TDP of just 105 watts, natively supports RAM up to 3200 MHz, though obviously you can go higher than that, and like every other Ryzen chip that I know of, is fully unlocked for overclocking. So with tech and specs like that to back it up, why wasn't everyone singing the 5800X's praises back when it first launched? Well, I say everyone there, but I'm mostly referring to reviewers. Regular folk and scalpers bought this thing and the rest of the 5000 series lineup like I buy cases of Monster when they go on sale at Checkers. The reason why certain reviewers didn't bend the knee to the 5800X was pretty simple in most cases. Sandwiched right between the beastly 5900X and the extremely impressive 5600X, the 5800X's pricing just didn't make it all that compelling. At launch, the 5800X came in at $150 more than the 6-core 5600X, and an upgrade to the 12-core 5900X would have only cost you about $100 more. This made it very easy to recommend the 5600X for gamers and the 5900X for people who also use their systems for work, or like even their Intel counterparts, seemingly leaving the 5800X in a very awkward middle of the pack position. But that position has changed now that things have stabilized a bit and scalpers have had their fill. Now the 5800X is a much more compelling chip for gamers and creatives alike at $394, or $7,600 at Wootware, which means there's only about $121 premium going from the 5600X to the 5800X, and surprisingly and sadly, going from the 5800X to the 5900X will cost you between $164 to $216 more dollars at the time of filming. Of course, AMD doesn't have the only horse in this race. Intel's similarly spec'd and impressive in its own right 11700K also lands at around the same price point as the 5800X. But that's only really on paper. Because Intel's latest chips are based on 14 nanometers, they tend to need more juice to run properly, which means more expensive motherboards with beefier VRM configurations, and that definitely tips the value scale in favor of the 5800X. But let's shelve that for a minute and get to what's most important here: performance. During testing across all the systems, I ran a 32GB kit of Crucial Ballistics RGB memory at 3600 MHz CL16. I tossed in an MSI RTX 3070 Gaming X Trio, MSI's MAG Core Liquid 360R to keep things cool, Antec's 750W EIG Pro, and Crucial's P5 M.2 as the main drive. As for the AMD chips, they were socketed into MSI's MPG X570 Gaming Pro Carbon, while Asus's Tough Gaming Z590 Plus handled Intel. And for the first round of tests, all the chips were run at stock settings. To kick things off, let's take a look at productivity. And first up is good old Cinebench, testing both single and multi-core performance. And to absolutely no one's surprise, none of the chips could best the Core i9-10900K with its extra cores when it comes to the multi-core run, although both the 5800X and 11700KF came pretty close. That is something we definitely don't see playing out when it comes to single-core performance, where while it was a close race between it and the 11700KF, AMD's 5800X managed to come out on top by a pretty decent margin. Next up is Blender, running both the BMW and Fishy Cat tests. And because this is an all-core heavy workload, the 10900K does come out on top, but even so, the 5800X and the 11700KF weren't too far behind, with the latter taking a slight lead over the 5800X. As for gaming, let's kick things off with two synthetic benchmarks in the form of Unigine Superposition and 3D Mark's Time Spy. Curiously, it seems Superposition kind of favors the AMD chips, with each edging out the competition from Intel, while in Time Spy we kind of see the complete opposite play out, with Intel coming out on top. Moving on to actual games, instead of clearing up, the fierce battle between the 5800X and the 11700K just keeps getting messier and messier. In the majority of the titles we tested, the two chips seem very evenly matched, with one or the other just barely managing to squeak out a win. But even so, in certain titles like Hitman 3 and Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the gains coming from the 5800X are impressive. Impressive enough that even though the Intel chip did come out on top in 5 of the 9 games tested, and so technically won, AMD's combined average FPS was higher by about 2.7%. Clearly, the 5800X has some serious gaming muscle behind it, some of that coming from its max recorded single-core boost clock of 4.85 GHz. It's also not all that power hungry, only hitting a max power draw of about 142 watts, compared to the gluttonous 11700K's max of 184 watts. That lower power draw meant that the chip, with an ambient temp of 23 degrees, only hit a max of 77 degrees during testing, while the 11700K ran a bit toastier at 85 degrees. I did play around with overclocking for the 5800X just a little bit, but only managed to get a stable all-core overclock of 4.7 GHz, and with that speed applied, gaming performance actually suffered a little. Which makes sense because an all-core overclock stops AMD's precision boost and overdrive from automatically boosting higher in games. A per-core overclock is definitely the way to go if you want to overclock this bad boy. Now, clearly the 5800X is a gaming powerhouse and pretty dang decent for productivity too, but is it actually worth picking up? Well, if we're picking between it and the 11700K, then yes. While there are some arguments to be made for going with Team Blue here, integrated graphics being a pretty big one of those, the 5800X just has too big of a value advantage here. Even though both chips fall into about the same price class, once you factor in the 11700K's higher power draw requiring pricier motherboards with beefier VRM configurations, and a higher temperature possibly requiring a heftier cooler, then the value proposition just isn't there for the 11700K. As for the rest of the stack, including AMD's own 5600 and 5900X, along with some real competition from Team Blue in their latest i5 lineup, it's still a hard choice to make. Sort of. If you already use your system almost exclusively for gaming, or are looking to build or upgrade your system specifically for gaming, and don't have a massive budget, then the choice is simple. Go with the 5600X. It's the best bang for the buck gaming chip you can get right now, simple as that. And even with the lower core count, this 5600X should still be more than good enough for most creative applications. If you're on the opposite end and plan on primarily using your system for work, and can afford the extra $150 to $200 premium over the 5800X to get the 5900X, then absolutely go for it. Those 12 cores and 24 threads are going to make your life a heck of a lot easier when it comes to creative applications and even more extra CPU heavy professional applications. It's a great chip. So who's the 5800X for then? Well, the way I see it, the 5800X is for people like me. People who want a great gaming chip that also doubles as a damn decent work chip and actually falls into my budget, which doesn't allow for the extra $200 or so it would take to go to the 5900X. It's a chip for gamers who also dabble in creative work on the side. Streamers, photographers, YouTubers, advanced multitaskers, and even those who just want to dip their toes into more demanding stuff like 3D rendering and the like. The 5800X's price and performance position right now is slightly different from where it was at launch, and that difference is enough that if you are one of the people I just mentioned, then the 5800X is a pretty easy recommendation. Almost as easy as recommending that if you like this video, go ahead and hit that button and get subscribed if you want to see more videos like this one. Big thanks to AMD for letting me the 5800X to play around with, and thanks to everyone watching. See you in the next one. Cheers.